Thank you everyone for joining us this morning to celebrate Mount Diablo State Park's 100th birthday. My name is Jessie. I'm the Director of Marketing and Communications at Greenbelt Alliance. And for those of you who aren't familiar with our work, our mission is to educate, advocate, and collaborate to ensure the Bay Area's lands and communities are resilient to a changing climate. The work we do to protect the Bay Area's natural and agricultural lands, while also creating thriving communities, as well as this free outings program, is made possible by you. So please donate today, which you can do so securely on our website at greenbelt.org/donate. And we also have a very exciting program. It's called the Greenbelt Guardian Program, and it's for monthly donors. So if you give to Greenbelt Alliance $10 a month or more, you become a Greenbelt Guardian, which gives you some extra perks, including an exclusive outing with Ken, as well as some other things. And so if you're interested in joining that program, I encourage you to, again, go to our website, greenbelt.org/greenbelt-guardian, and learn more about that program. And without further ado, I will hand it over to Ken. Oh, and before I do, just to let everyone know, we are recording this outing and we will send a link to the recording later on today in a follow-up email. Thanks. Take it away, Ken.
Okay. Well, as mentioned, it's Mount Diablo's 100th birthday. It's actually on June 19th. And some people actually argue, no, well, it's really the 90th birthday. But Mount Diablo itself is about 2 million years old. And some of the rocks on Mount Diablo are even older still. They're 190 million years old, so we won't quibble over 10 years. But our virtual outing today begins from Curry Point, which is an interesting spot on the mountain. It's just off Southgate Road. And there's a big pull out there to park. There are no restrooms there, but you pass several on Southgate Road, either driving up or driving down, depending on what direction you're coming from. And it's interesting because Curry Point, just about halfway up the mountain, let's see, 1,774 feet. And the outing today, well, we haven't done for Greenbelt Alliance for many, many years. And this book came out after our Greenbelt Alliance outing. It was put out by the Mount Diablo Interpretive Association. And two of my friends, Mike Woodring and Ruth Ann Kishi, had done the book. And to my surprise, I looked in there. Not only is our hike in there, it's also got our title. So great minds think alike. But this is a wonderful book. Mount Diablo Interpretive Association is a nonprofit that supports the state park, does some interpretation and funds some projects. And you can actually order this book from their website, mdia.org. Anyway, the first portion of the walk is along the Knobcone Point Trail, the first 3/4 of a mile or so. And it's kind of nice. It's mostly level, and it's a great place to kind of warm up. And as you look back over your shoulder, though, there's kind of an interesting, you see the great flank of Mount Diablo, but there's an interesting looking boulder sticking out there. And that's of interest to geologists. It's actually a huge outcrop of blue glaucophane schist. I figured I'd get that out of the way early in the talk here before my mouth got too dry, so we didn't have an accident. And schist is a kind of interesting metamorphic rock. You see a few places in the Bay Area. We see a lot of it on Ring Mountain over in Marin when Kathy Petrick does our outing over there to find the Tiburon Mariposa lily in May. But also there's some schist outcrops on Mount Diablo like this one, but not quite as many. So it's not fair to say Mount Diablo is full of schist. And after about 3/4 of a mile, we come to a trail junction. And we take the downhill trail called the Devil's Slide Trail. And that sounds kind of ominous, kind of a slippery slope. But before we take that turn off, if you look maybe 100 feet ahead, there's another sign, but there's no trail there. That bears investigation. And if you walk over to the little signpost, you see it says Mount Diablo Meridian and north and south. That sounds like it could be a kind of a historic spot, an important spot, and it is. Back in 1850, we remember from our California history, that's when California became a state. And already by 1851, surveyors were figuring they better find a good spot with which to survey the public lands in California. And Mount Diablo was chosen as the point. So it's 1851 in the summertime. And this poor fellow was a deputy US surveyor, was sitting in his office in San Francisco, Leander Ransom. And Mr. Ransom had a couple of problems. One was that he was heavily pixelated, apparently. But the other was, well, he was stuck in the fog in San Francisco, and it was cold and miserable. So when his boss walked into the office and said, Leander, how'd you like to get out of the fog for a while? Leander said, sounds good to me. And his boss said, I got a project for you. I need you to go over to the East Bay and climb Mount Diablo, find a good spot on top and plant a survey marker. And then put posts in north, south, east, west directions every half mile or so for a ways. And Leander said, I'm on it, boss, and off he goes. Well, by the time he got to Mount Diablo on the south side in the San Ramon Valley, this being summer in Contra Costa County, it was 100 degrees. And he was starting to miss the fog, Leander was, but he struggled up the mountain with his party. It took him 2 days of brutal heat. They were dying of thirst, but they made it to the top. And he dug his hole and he stuck in his flagpost, and that became the Mount Diablo Basin Meridian Line. That's the point right here from which 2/3 of California and all of Nevada are surveyed. And if you own property in the area, take a look at the legal description on your deed. It always is written, referred to and described as Mount Diablo Basin Meridian. And if you remember last month when we did the Muir Woods talk, this was the survey that William Kidd had done of Muir Woods. And here it says, Mount Diablo Meridian, Township number 1 North, Range number 6 West, Mount Diablo Meridian. And here's the little sketch that Ransom made. Look, it looks like it's taken right from this point. There's the mountain, there's the profile looking north. And there's his flag on top for the survey point. Not quite to scale, but he was quite proud of himself. So for all his trouble, Leander Ransom, he has Ransom Point named after him. This is the view of Ransom Point from the summit. And from that day forward, he never, ever complained about the fog again in San Francisco. Well, after we paid homage to Leander Ransom, after you paid homage to Leander Ransom and his point there, you can head down the Devil's Slide Trail. A couple of deer on the way there. And as you walk down, there's well, there still is and probably will be for another several weeks. The field is covered with some interesting little plants. And just looking at it, it's a bit difficult to figure out what you're looking at. Those look like fern leaves, but there's flowers. So it's obviously not a fern, but this is yarrow, Achillea millifolium. And the millifolium, well, that means 1,000 leaves. So they do look like little fern leaves with all the little leaflets there. And yarrow was actually used, these leaves were used medicinally from ancient times right up through the 19th century. They were in the medical kit of every doctor. A poultice of yarrow leaves helps staunch the flow of blood in a wound. So this was used to help stop bleeding. And it was in the medical kit of all the physicians right through the Civil War. I don't think it helped much if a Minute ball passed through you, but other types of wounds, it was beneficial. And Mount Diablo's John Marsh, the first doctor in California, no doubt had some in his medical kit. The Achillea comes from Achilles. There was a species of the Achillea that was used to treat his soldiers at the Battle of Troy. Now, I'm noticing a great defect in this armor. So this guy's lucky he only got wounded in the arm. It could have been much worse. So head down the canyon, and pretty soon we're into the shade and we see some real ferns. And those of you that know a little bit about botany or love hiking might recognize the two ferns. They're kind of diminutive, but they're quite attractive looking. One is maidenhair fern. And if you look carefully, the interesting thing, besides it doesn't quite look like a fern leaf, are the little stalks, the little stipes. They're black. And one of the traditional Native American uses was to weave caps out of the stipes, black mourning caps that widows would wear after their mates had died. The other fern that grows with it that we saw on the rock, it looks like it's growing right out of the rock, right out of the moss there, and it's got a great name. It's fun to say, polypody. And polypody means many feet in Greek, in Latin or Greek. But pretty soon, the visual gives way to the olfactory because you start smelling the sulfur spring. They really didn't need the sign there. You can smell it from there. And at the bottom of the trail, there's a really prominent sulfur spring, of which there are several on Mount Diablo. And even in a drought year, this is bubbling up from underground. And it was quite the attraction in the 19th century. In the 1870s, one visitor to Mount Diablo wrote in her diary, "They've got these sulfur springs on Mount Diablo. They smell like the cleanings from Rip Van Winkle's gun barrel with some rotten eggs that came around the horn with the 49ers mixed in." I'm guessing that took up the entire page. But, you can dip your feet in there and take the cure. And after you're done, you can head on down the trail. And at the bottom, at the junction with the trail up to Rock City, well, marked by this great sign, except it's not that, the sign is nice, but the verbiage is a little confusing. And this is one reason I kind of mentioned the book at the start, and you can also get a map. The state parks have a very strange protocol for their signage. The big lettering is for your ultimate destination. The tiny little lettering on top is the trail you're going to be on, which is very confusing. And it's just the way the state park does things. And all the signs on Mount Diablo are that way. Interestingly enough, on Mount Tamalpais, the new signs that put in to replace old ones, they're not like that. Mount Tamalpais went rogue, probably got tired of people getting lost, and they've got the trail in large letters, but we're stuck here on Mount Diablo for a while. And right opposite the trail sign is the first of many Indian grinding rocks that we'll see today. So we head up the Madrone Trail, and lots of ferns and kind of lush and moist and in the shade. It's not what people not from the area usually think of Mount Diablo, but we do have lots of trails like that. And in rainier times, there's even several creek crossings. But finally, we come for the tree for which the trail is named, our California madrone tree, Arbutus Menzies. This is the one the kids call the refrigerator tree. It kind of looks like a manzanita on steroids. They're related, but this is the tree-sized version. And this is the one, since it peels off its bark, the vesicles carrying the water up the tree are very close to the surface. So on a very hot day, if you need to cool down, you just give a nearby madrone a hug, and that'll do the trick. So it serves two purposes. It'll cool you down, and then you're a real honest to goodness tree hugger. Arbutus Menzesii. Well, it's named for Archibald Menzies. And we talked a little bit about him a couple of months ago on the native trees presentation. Dr. Menzies was the surgeon / naturalist on the Voyage of Discovery, captained by George Vancouver. And he made quite an impression on the natives. He was known as the red-faced doctor who sawed off men's limbs and collected grasses. So why does this tree peel? Well, there's really three theories. One is it's just the way it grows. You know, sycamores, as they grow, they get that jigsaw puzzle pattern in their bark. Coastal live oaks can develop deep fissures in their bark like they're flexing. And these trees peel. Well, that's one idea. The second idea is it's a great mechanism for keeping off fungus that the tree doesn't want. It just peels it right off. And the newest idea is that, well, these trees, they're beautiful trees, but they eventually get overshaded by oaks and bays, and they have a tough time getting light. And the green, notice it's green where it's shed the bark. The green is caused by chloroplasts in the trunk, like in the leaves. So any light that misses the madrone leaves, any light that gets through the bays and the oaks and misses the madrone leaves but hits the trunks, well, it can be used by the tree. It's a trunk photosynthesizer. And that kind of makes sense because look where the peeling is. It's on the top where the light would hit. You figure if that wasn't the case, it would peel from the bottom where by gravity. So that sounds like a pretty good theory, and I suspect there's something to be said about all three. In the springtime, it has a really nice vase, urn-shaped flowers that are favored by native bees and our native flies. And if you take a walk up Sycamore, if you do this hike in the springtime, walk up Madrone Canyon, there's just a constant buzz above you from all the flies and bees around the flowers. It's kind of the background noise, the soothing background noise. Later in the year, it develops these great berries that are favored by birds. And still a bit further up the trail, well, come upon some native bunch grasses, which aren't all that common in California and the Bay Area today. This is what we had up until the introduction of cattle and cattle grazing. Native bunch grasses, well, they're very deep rooted. They have roots that go down 6 to 8 feet. They're perennials. They survive all year. Even the centers in the middle of winter are green. But they also taste good. And they were the things, once the cattle were brought over from Europe, that they were preferentially grazed by the cattle. They're nutritious, the cattle loved them, and they were replaced by what we have mostly today, those annual bunch grasses, the ones that get seeds stuck all over our socks. Those non-native annuals, well, they came over attached to as seeds in the cattle's hide. They came over in dirt that was ballast on ships from Europe, and then the dirt was dumped and the non-native grasses grew. And they came over as contaminants in grain crops. But they put out a lot of seeds, and that's what has mostly replaced these, our native bunch grasses. And up here, there was obviously never any cattle grazing on this narrow trail. And what's happened with the disappearance of our bunch grasses, it's really changed the hydrology of the Bay Area. In wintertime with heavy rains, with the deep grasses, it's got kind of a matted root system, and it can hold the water in the soil and release it slowly into the water table and down into our creeks. So back when we had native bunch grasses as the predominant grasses, Our creeks ran a lot later. They stayed, had water flowing into the summertime. With the non-natives, the shallow-rooted non-natives, when there's a heavy rain, they can't hold the water. It pours into the creeks. There's flooding. There's landslides and siltation. And it's one of the things, you build a house up near, it's really increased the danger of floods and the frequency of floods in the Bay Area. So it's really a challenge for resilient communities in the present day regime. And of course, that's one of the concerns of Greenbelt Alliance, building climate resilient communities in flood prone areas. But we can enjoy the native bunch grasses where they still grow. We're not going to get them back on a wide scale basis. Well, not too many people on this trail. It's really a delight, but occasionally someone will pass you and you might take a second look because they all look like they're carrying giant padlocks on their shoulders. What could they possibly be doing? Well, this is our trail, but there's a little bypass here. And if you head up there for a few yards, you'll see what they're all doing, because that's where the people with the padlocks on their shoulders are heading. There's a huge cliff that rock climbers love on Mount Diablo. And on the day I wanted to take these pictures, there happened to be someone right above me, so we're going to have to use our imaginations mostly here. If you look carefully at the cliff here, you see these little grooves, little ripple marks, little dendritic patterns. There's one here, there's one here, there's one here, there's one here. What you're looking at is an ancient beach. Those little marks, those are caused by the waves that go back and forth at the beach, the little ripple marks. And now they're fossilized. The thing is, the beach they made those marks on, well, it's about 50 million years old and it's been tipped to vertical. So that's what those climbers are climbing up, a 50 million year old beach. There was a guy right there. I want to take the picture right below. And he had two buddies down there spotting him. So I asked him if it was okay if I just snuck in and took a picture or two. I explained what the cliff wall was there, what the rock wall was there, and they became so entranced that they started to look for these little ripple marks for me. And they've actually found the ones that I took pictures of, and they kind of lost interest in the climber they were spotting. So I wanted to move on because this poor guy was up there and he wasn't moving. He may be there to this day. But if you take a little walk down Madrone Canyon, you'll want to look for that little cutoff and take a look at the 50 million year old beach. Well, not further on, we finally make it to Rock City. This is the first picnic table at Rock City. There's a madrone tree. This particular one isn't doing well. You see it's being propped up here. Philosophy majors will tell you one of the more obscure quotes from Socrates was, "Fools sit under the arbutus tree." Well, he was referring to arbutus that grows in the Mediterranean, and he used that despairingly to refer to his students, who whenever there was physical work to be done would hide under the nearest arbutus tree. But in this case, I think it applies here. I would not sit at that bench given that tree. Find another picnic bench there to eat at or to rest at. But it is worth looking at. A lot of the benches and picnic tables on Mount Diablo at Rock City, because they were all built during the 1930s. This great historic rustic architecture. And you can tell how long they've been there. They've got lichen growing all over them. Underneath, they've got little mounds. There's a little mound underneath the seat. There's another mound underneath the table. And that was right up here was the original ground level. That's the original ground level. This shows you what 85 years of rain will do. So it's washed away all the other dirt except where it's been protected under the bench. And right next to this bench, and quite a lot of the benches at Rock City, there are stoves. And again, these were built during the 1930s by Depression era workers. And that design of stove, well, it was used later at Yosemite Park and national parks across the country and in state parks across the country, every place where the CCC did their work. And the generic name is Diablo Stove. So if you go to Yosemite, you can, when you have a campsite there, you've got a Diablo Stove. The rock that was used by the CCC workers to build the stoves, well, it actually was quarried from lower down in the mountain in a different type of rock down low on Southgate Road, a fossiliferous sandstone. And if you look carefully, you can see what kind of little critters lived in that ancient inland sea of about 15 million years ago. Here's a fossilized oyster. Here's a scallop. Here's a sand dollar, all in the stoves. So during the 1930s, there was a huge CCC camp in Rock City. This is actually the site of Live Oak Campground today in Rock City. And this was pretty massive. This was a home for the workers all over the East Bay at night. And they built many of the structures, the historic structures you see on Mount Diablo. They did the original trail work, also on Mount Tamalpais State Park and other parks throughout the Bay Area. But really the kind of the modern history of Mount Diablo starts a few decades earlier in the 1870s with these guys. And if you know your California history, you might recognize them. California's railroad barons, it says. Some people would say California's robber barons. Let's see, the big four. Huntington, I think I got them in order. Crocker, that's Hopkins for sure, and Stanford. And they were kind of notorious, but they didn't do the dirty work. There were politicians to be bribed and people to be threatened with, to give up their land. They had their own, Rudy Giuliani or Roy Cohn or Karl Rove or however you want to put their own political operative. Their attorney was David Colton. He was kind of notorious in the day. He was their fixer. And after the Transcontinental Railroad was completed, it was assumed that there were several spur lines that were going to be built in the Bay Area. And likely candidates were the valleys around Mount Diablo. So the railroads actually, David Colton actually bought up quite a bit of land for the railroad, just in case. There was Perkins Canyon over on the east side was railroad land, and he bought a huge swath of land above this in the San Ramon Valley, up Mount Diablo, which included present-day Rock City. And for David Colton, it was a win-win proposition. First, he secured this land for the railroad just in case. But secondly, he had a place to ride horses, and he loved to ride horses. So he bought this land in the name of the Big Four and himself, and he established Railroad Ranch at the base of the mountain. And eventually, when it was clear they wouldn't need the land for the railroad, he bought out the Big Four, and it was all his. And he enjoyed riding his horses there right up until 1878, when one of his horses threw him off and Colton was killed. The property went to his daughter, who was married to a gentleman named Dan Cook. That's where Dan Cook Canyon comes from on Mount Diablo, and Railroad Ranch became Cook Ranch. But by 1911, that property at the base of the mountain and up through the south slope of Mount Diablo was in the hands of this earnest-looking young gentleman, Robert Noble Burgess. And Mr. Burgess had big plans. He was going to build Diablo estates up the side of the mountain. And towards this end, he built the roads that we drive up today. He built Northgate Road and Southgate Road and the Summit Road. Started in 1911, finished in 1915. So those of you who have driven up Mount Diablo and complained about the road saying, what's wrong? What's the matter with this road? It looks like it was built 100 years ago. Well, it really was. So he built the roads. Where the ranch had been, where Railroad Ranch had been at the bottom of the mountain, he built Diablo Country Club, Mar-a-Lago West. And Rock City was going to be the big playground for his development. He renamed that Garden of the Jungle Gods. And he was feeling particularly optimistic and in fine fiddle after a 4-hour horseback ride on Mount Diablo with this gentleman, William Randolph Hearst. And he thought he had a great financial partner because Hearst seemed very interested in the project, interested in coming in and helping fund it. And what particularly interested Hearst was the plans for the summit. There at the summit, they were going to build a huge castle, Torre del Sol. Well, it looks kind of familiar, huh? Well, turns out that was kind of the high point of Hearst's interest. He kind of went on to other things. He did get his castle built, but it was a bit south down at San Simeon, and poor Burgess went bankrupt. Leaving us with a toll road and Garden of the Jungle Gods. Well, this was a pretty close call, and the folks in Contra Costa County in the East Bay thought, we almost lost this. This would be a great place for a park. So in 1920, they got together some prominent citizens and local legislatures and drew up a bill and they managed to get through the state legislature, creating a Mount Diablo State Park. And even more amazing, allocating a little money, $2,500 to buy some land. And the land that was purchased was a few hundred acres near the summit. But in 1921, that was saying something, and it was decided they would hold a great dedication ceremony. And it was such an important thing that the lieutenant governor came to be the MC. So on June 19th, 1921, the dedication was held. This was the crowd right at the summit. And this little platform here, this concrete here, that's actually where the Mount Diablo Basin Meridian, where Mr. Ransom dug his hole all those decades before. So it was quite a nice little ceremony. As far as I know, that was the first and only time a tuba actually summited Mount Diablo. 1928, a statewide park bond was passed, creating the California State Park system. And then there was money to increase Mount Diablo State Park from a few hundred acres to several thousand acres. And that new addition was to include Garden of the Jungle Gods, Rock City, and lots of land on the south side. And that was a big deal. We weren't going to settle for any lieutenant governor for that dedication. We wanted the real thing. And so the dedication on April 26, 1931, included our Sonny Jim Rolf, Governor Rolf. And those of you from San Francisco have probably heard of him. He was the mayor of San Francisco for a time. And while he was mayor, he was not known either for his sobriety or his honesty, but he was there. So on the morning of April 26th, 1931, he started out at the head of a car caravan that was estimated at anywhere between 600 to 1,000 automobiles making their way towards Mount Diablo. Now the public was invited, they were already there. The dedication was to take place in Rock City. And there were many hundreds of people there waiting for the governor to arrive. They were being entertained by a high school band from Martinez, probably Alhambra High School, and rodeo riders from Livermore. They were doing roping tricks, lassoing everything in sight. At the time, Mount Diablo not only had cattle ranching, had sheep ranching too. So there was no lack of things to rope when they ran out of inanimate objects. Well, April 26th was not to be Sunny Jim Roll's day. It started to rain on his parade almost immediately. First a drizzle, and by the time they got to San Ramon Valley at the base of Mount Diablo, it was coming down in buckets. I would say cats and dogs, but on Mount Diablo, we say scorpions, coming down scorpions and tarantulas. And it started to lightning and thunder. And it was decided it was best not to take all those cars up Southgate Road, rather to hold the dedication ceremony at the Diablo Country Club. And one of the governor's aides mentioned, or in an aside, said, well, that's probably a good thing because Sonny Jim over there is already drunk as a skunk. There was a lightning and a clap of thunder, and Sonny Jim thought it was a 21-gun salute in his honor at Rock City. They had started without him. So they ended up holding the dedication at Diablo Country Club. Those poor people up at the public up at Rock City had to wait out the downpour and then try to make their way down. Unfortunately, where they had all parked off the side of the road, it was muddy. Their cars were mired in mud. But that's where those rodeo riders from Livermore came in. They lassoed the cars, the axles with their ropes, and pulled them to safety onto the asphalt road. And that's where AAA roadside service, that's where it's got its start. Not really, but they did rescue the cars. One of the women up at Rock City was philosophical. She said, well, Mount Diablo sure lived up to its name this day. And the park superintendent, the park warden, next day checked himself into the hospital with pneumonia. So today, Rock City is kind of a fun place where, we stop and explore some of the wind caves. The caves and the rocks actually have nothing to do, their creation has nothing to do with wind. This is a very porous and permeable sandstone. So when it rains, water soaks in easily. Rainwater that's mixed with carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, forming a very weak acid, carbonic acid. That's not the same as acid rain. It doesn't bother people at all, but it does bother the mineral cement that glues the sand grains together. That weak acid soaks into the rock, it dissolves the cement, moves the cement around in the rock. And in the summertime, when it's hot and dry, that water evaporates, but by then there's areas of the rock that now have extra cement from the action of the water. There's other areas that have lost all their mineral glue. And that's where these wind caves develop. So Mr. Burgess, in anticipation of Diablo Estates, he gave names to a lot of the rock formations. Here's one of our Greenbelt Alliance outings groups in Whale Rock. And Elephant Rock. This one actually kind of looks like what here's the head of the elephant. Here's one leg, here's the other leg. The second graders were a lot cuter. The trails through Rock City, there's like 100 years of social trails, so it can be a little confusing. But on our hike through Rock City, we were saved by these trail signs, which are not the standard state park trail signs. If you look carefully, they all say Trail Through Time on them. And that's actually what we follow through Rock City. And the Trail Through Time, it was a 10-year project. think it stretched from like 1998 to 2008. And the famous Bay Area naturalist, geologist Doris Sloan, professor at UC Berkeley, got the Museum of Paleontology at Berkeley and the Mount Diablo Interpretive Association together on a kind of on a idea that they both had for a while. And she was kind of the starting force. A lot of people worked many, many years to get this done, but it's now finished. It's about 6.5 miles of a trail stretching from the bottom of Sycamore Canyon all the way up to the summit. And along the way, there are about 20 huge interpretive signs that tell you what you're looking at. A hike up Mount Diablo is a walk back in time. So you actually walking through 180, 190 million years of geologic history. And these signs tell you what you're looking at. They also interpret the natural history and some of the cultural history in the mountain. You don't want to do that hike in one day. It's like an ungodly elevation gain, 3,300, 3,400 feet. We've done that before with Greenbelt Alliance. We do it as a kind of a car caravan where we all drive to different spots that are important, that are on this trail through time. And we do short hikes to look at the features, including the caves at Rock City. This is one of our outings from many years ago. This is the lower summit parking lot. So we didn't make it up that day by car. And so if anybody's interested, maybe we'll do that again sometime in the near future. I'll have to lure Karen Sinowick, one of our outings leaders and a geologist back from Grass Valley, where she's retired to, but she's always happy to come back and talk about geology. And there's a trail map, and you can download from that MDIA website. Okay, so we make our walk through Rock City here, and I can say anytime you start to get confused and wonder which way to go, just look up. There'll be one of these trail through time trail markers there. You get to pass through some more grinding rocks, and there's a big trail through time interpretive panel there. And eventually you come to this sign here, Civilian Conservation Corps Trail. That's fitting, but the trail is like 100 yards. It takes you this overhang, and in the distance is the very famous Mount Diablo landmark, at least Sentinel Rock. Now there are steps down carved by the CCC workers, but then the trail kind of peters out, and there's no really defined trail. There's like 3 ways to get there. You just choose one and keep going, and you'll make it. You can make a climb up Sentinel Rock. There's steps carved in the rock, and there's little railings. It's kind of a beginner's half dome, but not as scary. And here's our group, happy group at the top there. Once you get back on the trail, we'll finish up our hike here through Rock City. One of the most prominent plants that you pass is the Mount Diablo Manzanita, which is significant because it only grows on Mount Diablo in the immediate area, no place else in the world, an endemic species. And the way you recognize it on Mount Diablo is that the leaves are attached right to the branches. There's no stalk, no petiole, and the branches are hairy, or as botanists say, pubescent. There's other manzanitas that have that characteristic, but not on Mount Diablo. It's only our Mount Diablo Manzanita. And it was first scientifically described by the very famous botanist Alice Eastwood. She was head of the rare plant collection at the Academy of Sciences in San Francisco for over 50 years. She's also got a manzanita named after her, a common name, the Eastwood Manzanita, which is one of the 4 manzanitas found on Mount Diablo. So we head on and take the staircase trail, climb some stairs, and we come face to face with this very odd looking rock It has little turbines in it. What could they be? Well, fortunately, there's a trail through time sign right there. These are actually tarantella. These are 50 million-year-old aquatic snails. We continue up the trail. It's a little bit steep, but it's not too long. And keep your eyes peeled. I've seen Alameda whip snakes, kind of a threatened species near the trail. And then up to the top, and we're almost back now. And one more thing to look at, we get to pass through some grove of foothill pines, Pinus sibyniana. And this, it's only 3 pine trees on Mount Diablo. This is the most common. This is one of our drought pines, and you can see all these characteristics that make it adaptable to its adaptations to growing in hot, dry climates. Very sparse vegetation. It's open at the top. Huge pine cones. It has the second heaviest cones of any pine tree. Socrates might have said, fools sit under the arbutus tree, but you don't want to be sitting under this tree either. And these trees, even though they're drought trees, they're not doing well. They can stand a few years of dryness, but they do need water. And in a prolonged drought like we've got, after several years, they don't have enough water to make resin. And that's kind of the tree's antiseptic. That's what the foothill pine uses to seal out bark beetles and mistletoe. So in a lot of areas in Mount Diablo, the foothill pines are dying. And also our coulter pines are not doing well, and some of our knobcone pines. And that's going to result in a lot of dead wood. And of course, there's another problem that Greenbelt Alliance is working on, building fire resilient communities. And I'm guessing that had Diablo Estates had been built, it would have lasted perhaps a decade or two before one of the frequent range fires on Mount Diablo would have taken it out. But today, it was nice to be able to enjoy these trees. And I happened to be passing through as these trees were letting loose with their spring pollen. So I'm going to try something here as a very last thing to do. You know, I would have liked to let you sniff the sulfur spring. I couldn't do that, but we can all share in the joys of pollen floating through the air. So if you're still wearing your COVID mask, you're all right. You can sneeze into the mask. Otherwise, you need to get a hanky and get ready to sneeze. You ready? Here we go.
I'd say God bless you, but I'm not authorized to give blessings.
I'm not authorized to give blessings, but our marketing communications director, Jesse Brennan is. So you ready, Jesse, to bless everybody?
Sure am, Ken. God bless everyone who sneezed. Apparently I am authorized. That was a great outing, Ken. Thank you so much, and a very fun ending. We did have a few questions come in during the presentation. First of all, Floyd asked, how are those caves at Boy Scout Rocks formed?
Oh, that's the same. That's the same way. It's all differential weathering. It has to do with the kind of sandstone. The sandstone is tough. It's quartz grains, actually from the Sierra Nevada. And some of it came all the way from Idaho too, part of the Idaho granitic batholith. Strong little sand grains, but they're cemented together with calcium carbonate, which you might remember fizzes in weak acid. So it's the cement holding the sand grains together dissolves in water, and it gets redistributed. And it's the areas that have lost all their sand grains, all their mineral cement, those sand grains get weathered away pretty quickly, and that's what forms the caves. So they're called wind caves. It would be better to call them water caves, but geologists hate to get laughed at, so they're not going to do that.
Alrighty. And Kevin asked, what are grinding rocks?
Oh, well, those were where the pounding rocks, that's where the Native Americans prepared when the acorns were harvested. Those were the rocks where they were pounded with pestles to make acorn meal. And all through, I can see what that rock would be great because it forms those indentations easily, but the grains peel off. So you probably how that was actually the women's job for the Native Americans. The men would go out hunting, but they might not find anything. And most of the food was some products made out of acorns. That's what the Native Americans survived on. And there's those pounding rocks all the way down Mount Diablo. There was huge seasonal encampments on the mountain. But those were the pounding rocks that pounded the acorn into acorn meal, where it could be made into cakes and bread and just about everything else. That was the staple of a Native American diet.
Interesting. Okay. And Gretchen asked, how long would it take to do this hike?
Oh, it's not, well, if I'm sitting there leading it, blabbing all the way, Gretchen, you could do it like 2 to 3, give yourself time, 3 hours. It's not very, it's 3.5 to 4 miles, about 1,000-foot elevation gain, but a lot of it's in the shade. So it's not a difficult walk. It's rated in that book, easy to moderate. And we'll try to do that again this fall or next spring, Gretchen, so you can come with us.
Alrighty. We have an anonymous attendee who asked or said, you mentioned that we would never get native bunch grasses back on a large scale. Is anyone doing anything to restore them, even on a small scale? It seems that having more of them around would be incredibly beneficial.
It is, where we see, there's a few spots like we passed on the trail there, where you see the native grasses. They're grown in serpentine soil because the non-natives don't like that. The problem, there was a project that to try to restore native bunch grasses to the fields around Mitchell Canyon, and that just didn't work. The problem, our non-natives put out a lot of seeds. I mean, they just overwhelm the natives once they're gone. It's just a very difficult job. Over in Show Ridge, there's a hillside that the volunteers there for the Walnut Creek Open Space have removed all of the non-natives. They've planted native plants and native bunch grasses, but they're there almost every day doing weeding. And it would be beneficial. It's just so difficult to do just because those non-natives have such an advantage putting out all those seeds, because our perennials don't have to do that. They're not used to doing that. They much fewer seeds, and the other ones, the annuals, they grow fast and die young. So one of the walks we'll do probably next spring, we'll take a walk and we'll head from Burgess Ranch at Shell Ridge, and we'll head past and we can look at all the native bunch grasses that are on that hillside that has been restored by the volunteers with the Walnut Creek the open space volunteers.
And then Susan asked, does Mount Diablo ever get snow?
Yes, get snow at the top, lots of snow. Not this year, we only had a few dustings, but a few years ago, there was like 1.5 feet of snow, not a few, it must have been a couple decades now. Every single tree at the top was broken.
Wow. But
yeah, the wind can blow 100 miles an hour at the top. I don't know how long that castle would have lasted up there either. And it can be heavy, heavy snow in the winter time. And they need to close the roads. And of course, everyone is heading up there to see the snow. So that creates a great traffic jam. But yeah, if you miss the snow from back east, you can head over to Mount Diablo. You probably have to hike up from the bottom to get to the snow with the roads closed, but it's there.
Okay. Looks like we had some more questions come in. Sue asked, did the 2014 fires affect this area?
There were let's say the fire, 20, there was the Morgan fire. I don't know if the more recent ones have it. The big fire, I think, wasn't it 2013? Might have been that big fire that started in the Mercury mine on Perkins Canyon. And it did burn areas on Mount Diablo. It burned North Peak. It burned up a good part of the the east-facing side of the main peak. It burned right up to the Mary Bowerman Trail, and it actually hopped the trail there. They saved the trail and the trail signage. The firefighters were up there. It didn't burn any structures. And afterwards, I mean, the area actually needed a fire. It hadn't burned since 1977. And we saw a lot of flowers up there, whispering bells and fire poppies and wind poppies. So it turned out it cost $4 million to fight that fire. Everyone had to evacuate just in case. But afterwards, the Native Plant Society, I think they wanted to pin a medal on the guy that started the fire, because we saw a lot of plants up there that hadn't been seen and it didn't do any property damage. But the interesting thing is the family that started the fire was the same family that owns the Mercury mine that refuses to clean it up. So they're anti-tax and anti-government crusaders, but they want the government and the taxpayers to clean up their Mercury mine, and they haven't offered to pay the $4 million to clean up their fire either. But,
it's too bad.
and we've done walks. We'll do another walk at Perkins Canyon and see how it's coming from that fire. But it was a spot fire. There's places that it burned all the way across the mountain.
Okay, one last question. Seda asked, when is the best time to visit Mount Diablo?
Not the summer usually, though there's places there that are okay. It's usually late fall or winter or early spring. It's one of the wildflower hotspots. We do wildflower outings on Mount Diablo. There's flowers there that grow no place else in the world. The Mount Diablo fairy lantern for one. So springtime would be number one. Late fall would be number two, because you get to see the famous teddy bears of Mount Diablo, the tarantulas walking around. And then winter, you can walk in the snow if you go high enough.
Great. Well, to wrap
But
things
not
up,
summer, because you'll end up like poor Leander Ransom. He learned his lesson.
oh, yeah. Okay, well, thank you, Ken. We're going to wrap things up right at the top of the hour. Just a reminder for those who may have missed it at the beginning of this outing, we did record the program, and we'll share a link to that recording in a follow-up email that will go out later today. So check your inbox for that. And if you are interested in climate change and how it's impacting this beautiful place that we call home, I encourage you to attend our upcoming Climate Leader webinar, which will be on May 26th, where our advocacy manager, Justin Wing, will discuss the drought with Dr. Nusha Ajami from Stanford Woods Institute for the Environment. And you can get more information about that and our other events on our website at greenbelt.org/events. And again, I encourage you to donate if you can, as we are a small local nonprofit who depends on your generosity to thrive. And again, thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you next time. Have a wonderful weekend. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.